tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
With that, I want to get to some economic pocketbook issues because we might not find ourselves facing the barrel of the Canadian Human Rights Commission gun, but we are facing the grocery store price tags. And have you noticed things getting better? François-Philippe Champagne a couple of weeks back came out and gave this big, long kind of, he had like the mission accomplished banner behind him, basically, of saying, I've summoned all the grocers to Ottawa and they've all committed to lower their prices. They all had a plan out by Thanksgiving. Well, it's now a couple of weeks beyond, and, you know, I haven't been hearing any ringing success stories from Canadians telling me, wow, you know what, I wasn't originally going to buy a turkey, but now they've been slashed to 60% off, and I got the turkey, I got the stuffing, I got everything. I haven't heard much of that, and now François-Philippe Champagne has been taking aim at the grocery stores and saying, well, I need a firm plan. We need a firm plan. Where's your plan? Now, it was a little odd because a couple of weeks back, he said that he had seen the plans. Take a look.
From the perspective of a consumer, you're talking about flyers like they're a new thing. How is what you are saying not deeply offensive to Canadians who cannot afford the prices they're seeing now? And what you're proposing is plans that the grocery stores already do every winter, and that one professor just told me is business as usual.
So how would you know it's in the plan? Because I'm the only one to have the plans in Canada. No, I'm saying, no. Let's go back. Do you want to go to the transcript? I'm saying those are examples of what we see in the plans because I want the market to compete. I cannot say I received that from Loblaws. I received that from Metro. I received that from Costco. I received that from Walmart or Sobeys. What I'm saying is that example, no one is suggesting that Flyers is new. No one is suggesting that. But the question was, when are you going to see impact? Well, I say, when I read what I see from what I have in my plans or the plans that I've received, I already see things that's in the plan that are being put in action. So people responding to measures that they intend to do.
I feel like I feel like there was a translation needed for me to understand that, although he's speaking in English. I don't actually know what he said. But the one part I got was him saying there's a plan. He's the only one in Canada that's seen the plan. He has the plan. He sees the plan's already in effect. And then yesterday he comes out and he says, oh, these grocery stores need to be more forthright with their plans. Maybe it's because the government has dropped the ball once again. Franco Terrazzano joins me, federal director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Franco, did that look like a man with a plan to you?
It's a plan about making a plan sometime in the future. You know, it's like political theater, but it's like embarrassing political theater. I wanted to make an analogy that this kind of looks like, I don't know, your kid's grade 2 theater program, but even this is worse than going to maybe your grade school, your kid's grade school theater production. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was skeptical at the beginning when, you know, Canadians are looking at the government and saying, you know, you have to deal with inflation here. I can't afford to get by. And the government immediately just finds as its scapegoat Galen Weston and the head of Sobeys and the head of Costco. And that's not to say these people are perfect, but they made this big, huge show of summoning them to Ottawa and demanding they produce a plan. And then again, he comes out and wants to claim victory. Oh, yes, they've given the plan. It's great. We won. And then Canadian, like that, you can only keep up that scam for a few days before Canadians are like, well, the prices haven't really changed.
Yeah, every time you go to the grocery store, you know that the government has failed to bring down prices, right? Prices are going up. Everything feels like it's getting more expensive. And, you know, this is actually worse than political theater because this could have real consequences for Canadians. We think things are bad now, but wait until Trudeau brings forth his so-called solution. Remember, when he first started this theatrical play, he threatened, quote, tax measures. What do you think that means, Andrew? It means that Trudeau is musing about a grocery tax. Now, look, I'm not losing a second of sleep over these grocery store owners. In fact, it is okay to go after grocery store owners. What I would do is, how about we stop giving them buckets of taxpayer cash like the time the government gave Loblaws $12 million to buy some fridges. But the problem is that if the government were to bring in a grocery tax, guess who would end up paying it? All of us ordinary Canadians every time we go to the till, because that tax would be passed on to the price of food.
Yeah, and that was the one thing. I mean, he says a lot of things that I have trouble reconciling or understanding, like when Justin Trudeau tried to explain what a water bottle was or something like that. But when he tried to, threaten a grocery store tax, I'm like, how on earth like no one has ever saved money with a tax. Like, let's just go back to first principles here. A tax by definition is a tax. So the idea that like a tax measure was going to lower the price of anything, I've never I was really interested in saying, let's just dispense with partisanship. Like, literally explain to me your logic in saying that.
Yeah, I mean, another tax isn't going to make the box of cereal more affordable. It's going to make everything more expensive. And you know what's the craziest part of all of this? Less than a year ago, CBC News asked Trudeau about a grocery tax. And Mr. Trudeau rightly responded that a grocery tax would just be passed on to the consumer. That was less than a year ago. So what has changed? Well, the economic realities that Trudeau first described haven't changed. If the government hammers these stores with a new tax, that new tax would be passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices. So what has changed is the political realities. It's the political science, right? Trudeau is grasping for a scapegoat to take the pressure off his own failed policies that is making your life more expensive. And he's looking for the scapegoat. Right? And the scapegoat, of course, is the grocery stores. But the real problem that the government could fix today with a snap of the finger is the taxes that are already in place that are making food more expensive. Case in point, the government's own carbon tax, Andrew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, anytime, I think you and I have actually had this discussion in the past on the show. Like, there are a lot of things that the government cannot control. There are a lot of things with inflation that are happening globally. There are global economic trends. Now, that's not to say that governments can't do better things and weather it better, but the government has some levers that it has not even tried to pull. And one of those is the carbon tax. And people like the Conservatives in the past have rightly said this is a tax on everything, because there's the direct tax that you pay when you pay your home heating, you fuel up your car. And then there's the indirect tax that you have to pay because when you get that papaya that had to be flown or shipped and then driven, and the grocery store that needs to power its operations, and you pay that carbon tax, a little fraction of that carbon tax at every step of the life cycle and supply chain of a product.
You know what is so crazy? Less than 24 hours after Trudeau held that press conference threatening tax measures on the grocery store owners, less than 24 hours, the parliamentary budget officer, thank goodness for their work, came out with a report that shows exactly how the government could reduce prices, scrapping the carbon tax, okay? The PBO's report shows that the carbon tax in Canada is costing Canadian farmers $1 billion through 2030. Okay, by making it more expensive for them to use the natural gas and propane they use to dry grain or heat their barns. Well, guess what? When you make it more expensive for farmers to produce food, you make it more expensive for Canadians to buy food, right? Very simple, not rocket science. The carbon tax, as you rightly also described, is hammering the truck drivers every time they fuel up their big rigs with diesel. And when you make it more expensive for truckers to deliver the food, you make it more expensive for Canadians to buy the food. Now, what is so frustrating is that the carbon tax is making life more expensive in Canada and is doing absolutely nothing, zero zilch, for the environment, right? Because making it more expensive for Canadians to fuel up our cars or to fill up our grocery carts does absolutely nothing to reduce emissions in places like China or Russia or India or the United States.
I'm told by Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland we're being a little bit too gloomy here. Let's get her to weigh in.
Calgary Forest Lawn.
The finance minister is known for speeding up just for the wrong reasons. By adding more debt than every government before them combined, she put the pedal to the metal on her deficits and revved up inflation. And unlike an Alberta highway, the consequences of her spending isn't just a speeding ticket. It's a bigger deficit, higher inflation that led to higher interest rates, putting Canada most at risk in the G7 for a mortgage default crisis. After 8 years, they're definitely not worth the cost. Is the finance minister going to blow through her budget deficit projections again? Buy more than $6 billion? Yes or no?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, Our government will provide an update on our fiscal position, on expenses, and on revenues in the fall economic update in due course this fall. But I do want to be very, very clear on Canada's fiscal position. I was at the IMF World Bank Finance Ministers meeting just last week, and that is where it was so clear that Canada has the lowest deficit, the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. Our position is enviable, Mr. Speaker.
Well, what do you think, Franco? Are we in an enviable position financially?
I think anyone who has been to a grocery store, a gas station, or just left their house in the last, couple weeks knows that we are not. I mean, come on. The parliamentary budget officer, again, just produced another report. Okay, it's fiscal update, seeing where the government's finances are. And as bad as the budget was from Freeland, everything's even worse. It's been 6 months since Freeland tabled her last budget, and her deficit is already 16% higher. Interest charges, those are up. Folks, we're paying almost $4 billion every single month just to cover the interest charges on the government credit card. Almost $4 billion a month, not going to hospitals, not going to roads, not hiring more teachers, not lowering taxes, going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street. Does that sound good to you? $4 billion a month wasted on interest charges. Oh, how about this? Their fiscal anchor, right? Debt to GDP ratio going down. Freeland broke her fiscal anchor. Debt to GDP ratio going up. We're now, $1.2 trillion in debt by the end of this year, which is almost $30,000 for each and every Canadian. We've seen the carbon tax go up. We've seen a second carbon tax come in. We've seen alcohol taxes go up. We've seen payroll taxes go up. Now the government says it's going to hit us with a digital services tax. Folks, does this sound like good news to you? No, of course not. The only person who could think that we're in a good situation is a person on a minister's salary who has taken not one, not two, not three, but 4 pay raises over the last couple years.
Yeah, and very well said on all accounts there. And I think that, the envy, it's really interesting because everyone made fun of Chrystia Freeland for that old Disney Plus comment she made a little while back. But I think that was a picnic compared to the tone deafness of saying how enviable Canada's fiscal situation is. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director for the CTF. Always a pleasure, sir.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.